Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining. My name's Phil Leaney and I'm the lead for professional development and learning here at Birchwood. Welcome to our second in a series of 6 free webinars looking at how we can support students with SEND in mainstream settings. And so you're very welcome to today's webinar. Last week's webinar was a real success. What we found was that a lot of people viewed the webinar in their own time, and you can watch that on the school website, and I'll try and put a link to that in the chat. And we know that over 100 people have now watched that webinar, so I'm sure that this session will be just as well received. Today we've got Lauren Carroll, one of our teachers here at Birchwood, talking to you about a smooth transition, primarily the transition between mainstream and special education, but actually there's things that Lauren's going to be talking about that is good practice for transition, whatever the context, not just between schools. So what I'll do, I'll hand over to Lauren, and I hope you find the webinar really useful.
Okay, hi. So the title of our webinar today is A Smooth Transition, moving from mainstream education to special education. And some of the main themes that we're going to be thinking about are supporting relationships, building a picture, person-centered transition, and closure and the process of moving on. Sorry, seem to have frozen on the slides. Here we go. Okay. So I'm hoping that this will be helpful to you in different settings, as Phil was saying. But I am mostly thinking about students who have special educational needs, are currently in mainstream settings and are moving to special educational needs settings. So my name's Lauren. I am primary trained, but I've been at Birchwood for 4 years now. I am the transition lead here, and I'm also a class teacher and an English teacher. And I currently have a mixed age transition class at Birchwood Vale, one of our sites here. So the idea of my transition class is that students can come to us around about year 6 ordinarily, and then they have a nurturing base, but they also have access to our secondary timetable. So they get kind of a taste of what the secondary school life is like, but they have still got quite a large class team, and we have them for longer, and I have them for the majority of their lessons. So it's quite similar to primary, really, in the way that it's set up. Okay, so supporting relationships. Children and young people spend around 32.5 hours per week in our care. We support our students with their learning through good times and bad. And throughout COVID, I think it's become even more clear that we play a really significant role in the lives of our students and of their families, and that we hold the very privileged position as educators of being trusted. Central to our practice, I'm sure you will agree, is this relationship. So that's the first thing that I would like to talk about. And I would like to start by using the example of a transition of my own. So when I began working at Birchwood, I began with enthusiasm. I'd done my research. I knew what I wanted to teach first, and I was applying theories that I believed in. I set about creating the distraction-free classroom that I wanted, with a calm and friendly feel. I knew how I wanted it to look. I was nervous, and starting afresh was a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Moreover, I really didn't feel, to begin with, like I was connecting with some of my pupils, and I was having difficulty motivating them. Whilst observing a student one day, I realised that I had jumped to a conclusion, which wasn't necessarily accurate. So I began to spend a lot longer with this student in particular and others, and really started to focus on what they were communicating through their behaviour. I left my assumptions behind, and I started to allow the students to really tell me what they needed me to know. Connections and trust began to form, and with that, everything clicked into place. The time spent truly listening and really building trust with my students was more valuable to me, and in the process of getting to know each other, than any preparation or research could have been. So my own transition really taught me that there is the significance of my relationships with my students to my practice, and B, that the process of getting to know people well enough for a relationship to build could be incredibly difficult for our students and our young people who have special educational needs and have communication difficulties. The best resource that we have got as special schools is yourselves in mainstream schools, and the young people themselves and their families. In my role as transition lead, my main priority is building supportive relationships as early as possible. You are the current trusted support network, and we have large shoes to fill. So I'd like you just to take some time for a second just to think about the tiny significant details that you know about students in your class. So, for example, we may take for granted that we know Joe prefers to sit in the corner at the back, close to the wall, because he seems to be safest that way. We know that Jane needs to check the timetable when she comes in. We know that Matt doesn't like coming in through a busy playground, and he might need 5 minutes with a fidget toy to calm down and really feel settled in the classroom. It's raining heavily today, so we know that Liz will be unsettled and she may need you to close the blinds. Jenny's mum prefers a check-in at the beginning of the week. As education professionals, it takes us time to discover these things, but knowing them and acting on them makes a huge difference for the young people in our classrooms. When new settings have this information, this valuable, nuanced information early, it can make transition for our young people far smoother. So one of the earliest interactions that I have in my current role with our young people is when I attend annual reviews for students who are likely to join us. In these meetings, we are building inter-school connections, and we are meeting families properly for the first time, sometimes meeting the young people themselves. When we hold our open evenings and we have transition sessions, we are giving young people the opportunity to meet each other and to begin forging their new supportive relationships and allowing their families to do the same. So one of the nicest, most productive things that I think I tend to see when we have our transition evenings, and parents are there too, is when the parents and the carers begin to exchange numbers with each other and they start to build that support network for themselves, which can be a huge thing. As we know, students with special educational needs, it's a particularly large thing if they are moving from their family school that they've been with for all those years up to a secondary school, particularly if they are making the move from a mainstream school to a special educational needs setting. That can be a huge thing, not just for them, but for their families. So allowing time for those families to meet each other, start to build some connections, can be really important. Building a picture. A detailed, collaboratively written EHCP that really reflects the young person is an extremely helpful way to build a picture of that person and their needs, their preferences, their difficulties and their motivations. An EHCP that truly reflects a young person can be invaluable. My colleague Tom is going to be discussing the annual review process and how to build a person-centered EHCP on December the 1st, if that's something that you would like more information on. Another helpful document for primary schools and special educational needs settings is a positive behaviour support plan. So this can be a really fantastic way to detail the learning preferences of a young person and to pass on some of those tiny significant details that are quite easily taken for granted, but you undoubtedly know about the students that you've got. So this is a positive behaviour support plan on the screen now. This is one for a student that I currently have in my class this year. It was a particularly well written example where the Senko and the class team plus the student and the family had really collaborated to give me a lot of detailed information about the student, and I have found it extremely useful this year in helping that young man to settle into the classroom. So it's written collaboratively with as many people as you can, as many people as can give a really informed view on that young person and what they might need. It is brilliant if you can include the young person in that, if they are somebody who is capable of giving you their ideas and telling you exactly what it is that they like, that they find difficult, or things that they just really want people to know about them, things that are important about them. So it can detail their sensory preferences, which can be particularly important for us when it comes to setting up our classrooms and knowing what we need to have in terms of resources. And it's a good place to put their interests, their dislikes, anything that they find difficult, and it outlines their communication needs. So the piece on the right-hand side is the communication plan. So within that, what we're thinking about is how that person communicates. So for this young man, he's very chatty. His speech is mostly relevant and clear. And he can sometimes stall if he's unsure, and he will say or quite a lot, and it's quite a significant thing. So it was important to have that on there so that people understand how he is communicating. The receptive communication is the way that you can communicate with him. So this has been really useful, because it let me know that he was going to need some very clear, short instructions. He was going to need lots of modelling of correct speech. And I needed to make sure that he was concentrating before I delivered any key instructions or key information in the class. It also gives you a chance to just jot down anything like wearing glasses, or they are a Makaton user, or they need symbols on their work, those important things for planning and for setting up the classroom. And then we do have a behaviour script on there, which is an overview at this stage, because we then have a traffic lighted stages of behaviour section. So in here, we're simply describing the stages of that person's behaviour, so how they might look when they are really calm and engaged in the lesson or the situation, because it doesn't just apply to learning situations, this is all of the time. How they might look if they then become quite anxious or they are uncomfortable. How they might look if that then develops into crisis behaviour, and how that might look if we are then calming down post-incident. And really importantly, this gives us a chance to talk about how that person is best supported. So they have had their input in this, the Senko and the teacher did, and so did the parent in this particular sample, which was really helpful. So we knew straight away on receiving this student that he was going to need some space if he was becoming anxious, that he might bite his nails, and I might need to give him something that's a bit more productive to do with his hands. I might need to kind of replace that behaviour with something that's not destructive or not harmful to him. So I had a brilliant overview of this person before he joined me, which is really helpful. So when you're writing a positive behaviour support plan, if this is something that you decide to do for your young people, in preparation for their transition to another setting or class or another key stage, it's a really nice idea to think about the sensory preferences. So if you want a bit more information about sensory preferences, sensory behaviours, then my colleague Hannah did her webinar last week called Sensory Magic, and that's really, really worth a look. Consider any communication aids. So it might be things like enlarging font or using a tinted paper. Lots of our students who have autism or who have dyslexia tend to prefer a cream paper or pastel blue, pastel green. There might be information like that that could go into it. Think about their special interests or anything that could be used, particularly in those first weeks, to really help them to feel settled and to feel included and considered in their new classroom. All behaviour is communication, whether that's positive or negative, and a positive behaviour support plan can really help a new setting to decipher what that communication might be. I use Birchwood's positive behaviour support plan now as a form for primary schools. So this is what I'm sending out when I know I have a student coming to me, and I'm asking everybody to fill that in before they come to me, and it's just been a really nice way to gather that information in quite a structured format. Okay, so person-centered transition. Many of the young people that we work with have social communication difficulties, and the process of meeting new people in a new environment can be really overwhelming and confusing. A helpful way to ease the discomfort a little bit is to teach and then practice icebreakers. So to explicitly teach when you meet a new person, you could say, and to give examples of conversations, maybe pick out some things about that young person that they think are really important or really key about them and their identity, things that they might want to say just to start that conversation off. So if you have a young person in your class that you know is moving on and might not know anybody, it could be really useful to come up with these things, put them on a cue card, and then practice the conversation. So it might be that they are practicing with an adult, or it could be that if you've got more than one student who's moving on, you could have a small intervention group. They could practice those conversations and those icebreakers together. And there's lots of different social communication games and things that you can play that prepare for moving on and for a new start and meeting lots of new people. That can be really helpful. So a person-centered approach to transition is crucial. As we know, everybody reacts differently to new situations, and finding out what's important to the young person themselves and the questions that they want to know, and then helping them to find them out can be really useful, especially if you're showing them that you have taken an interest in the things that are key to them, and then you're helping them and modelling finding that information from their new setting. Okay, so for some students, the thing that they're really focused on could be the play spaces. It often is the playground, the equipment, the toys. For some, it might be who their supporting adults are, what they look like, what they sound like, especially for our students who might have some sensory differences. They might want to know what that person sounds like, and it might be really important for them to go and meet them and to see what they look like. For lots of students, it's where they are going to put their things, where their bag is going to go when they come in, and where they're going to go to get their lunch. So using a social story can be a really nice way to address this. A social story with photos is particularly good and is a really good way to rehearse what's going to happen, but from a safe space. So these can be used over the summer holiday. They could be rehearsed at home and used to just keep reminding the young person, we're going to a new place, this is what it looks like, and to talk through situations. So you might want to talk through when you get there, you will go through the door, you'll come into reception and talk through that journey through the new setting. Using personalised countdowns and videos can also be really useful. So you might want to have a timeline for that person, depending on what sort of visual layout they tend to prefer. You could personalise it with things that are really positive, that they really enjoy. So it's a positive thing. It's not a chore that we're having to go through countdowns, and make it into a really fun thing. So it might be that you only want to do it for a week beforehand. Perhaps it's somebody who's not going to cope particularly well with a long build up. We tend to provide these for students that we know are coming to us. So in consultation with that person, with their family, their key people, their teachers, we tend to make personalised packs of resources to help that student transition into our school. We have also produced a video, which is a virtual walk round of the school. It was done as part of COVID, when we unfortunately couldn't have people coming and visiting, and we knew this was going to be a really big, tricky thing for the students that were coming to us. But actually, it's been a very, very useful tool. And because it can be paused and it can be replayed and used again and again, I think that's a really helpful, really nice way for a young person to get to know their new space. Arranging for new schools, arranging to see new schools at different times of the day can also be really helpful. So as we know, some students will find the morning, they're quite fresh, they've got lots of energy, it could be quite noisy. They might find the afternoon difficult when they are tired and they're full, they've had their big roast dinner at lunchtime, and they are kind of running out of energy, running on fumes by the end of the day. They might also feel anxious about things like the lunchtime transitions, where we're moving between classes, where we know our corridors can be quite noisy, thinking about the spaces where we're going to eat and whether that's going to be loud, or who serves me the food, how does the food arrive, especially since a lot of our young people who have special educational needs can find food quite a tricky subject, and those transition times between lessons can be quite hard when it's quite unstructured. So it's useful to just see those different points in the day slowly and build it up if possible. I'm sure there are no schools that are going to object to you asking for that to happen. Okay, so I've just included a couple of examples here of social stories that we've used in the past. So I have redacted the information that is sensitive, but this one in particular was for a student who had special educational needs, but also has English as an additional language. And for this young person, it was routine that was key, and it was to do with going and finding sister at the end of the day. So this is quite a key point for the family, and it's something that has in the past been quite tricky. So we needed to detail what would happen at the end of the day when we went to find mum and sister. So as you can see, we've included photographs of our key spaces on here, and the timings are on there too, because this is somebody who really likes to check a timetable and really wants to know, needs to know when things are happening and how long for. Then we have got information like this in our My New School booklets, which we send out. So often our students are really interested in who their teacher is going to be. Naturally, that's probably something that I think we would all want to know. So who are the key people for me? What do they look like and how can they support me? So we tend to put a brief description of who we are with a photograph in this, so that we know who we're looking for on that first day. It can be really difficult if you're going somewhere. I think we probably all do it when we have meetings in other settings or we have meetings elsewhere. You know the name from emails of the person you're meeting, but if you don't know what they look like, actually that can be really nerve-wracking when you walk in, because you've got no idea if you're talking to the person that you've gone to meet or not. So having those photographs can be really, really helpful. Knowing what the layout of a classroom is, what the colour schemes are, can be really, really helpful as well. Okay. So to include an element of student voice to the webinar this evening, I interviewed some of our students that we currently have who I know transitioned to us from mainstream schools. And I asked them some questions about their transition to find out how they felt about it. So the first question that I asked them was, how did you feel about starting at Birchwood Vale? And this is what they told me. So one student said, I was a bit scared. It was a bit weird starting again. One said, it felt good and it was a good school for me to go to. And one said, I felt happy because it was like a little bit of freedom. I could feel normal with other children like me. And I asked them, what did you want to know before you started here? So this is quite useful for me in terms of transition, because it's helping me to build a picture of what I need to include in my information and the types of things that my students are thinking about. So one said what equipment there was in the playground and what my teachers would be like. One said, I wanted to know who I would make friends with and how people treat each other in this school, which I found really interesting. I wanted to know if it would be the same or different to my old school, and I wanted to know about the teachers and the classroom. And then I asked them what helped you to make the move. They found this question quite difficult and they were thinking back a while, but one student said it was courage. One said it was mum showed me some good photos of what the classroom and the playground were like, so I knew what it would look like. And one said meeting people on the transition night. And for that particular student, they did forge some really important relationships on that one evening, and it stuck with them. And they are still the friendships actually that person tends to favour. Okay, so closure and the process of moving on. It is important to allow time to celebrate a young person's achievements and their time with you as part of the process of moving on. It's a really nice idea to create a photo book or a memory booklet for students to think about their successes to date. Leaving space for a new chapter helps students to look forward to their next steps, and keeping the activities positive and focused on celebration really helps to create a positive outlook for the next stage. So rather than it being about goodbyes and we're going to miss you, which of course are true, it's really, really helpful if it's about your new chapter, what's going to be different at your new school, what's going to be the same, what do you think you might do when you move on, and making that a really exciting, positive thing so that they are geared up and in the right headspace to take on a new challenge. So Elsa has some really fantastic resources about moving on, and the examples that are on the screen at the minute were from a moving on pack. So lots of it is therapy and counselling, but there's also just some very helpful resources around emotions and feelings, things that we might be worried about, feeling proud of our accomplishments, and thinking about who can help us, some of those kind of key details, key bits of information for moving on. So allow space really for students to talk about their worries, to talk about moving on, to talk about what they're thinking about, and then also to work on the solutions together, which can be really helpful. There's plenty of things that the new setting is going to be able to do for them, but it's helpful with you being their current really significant person in school and being their current trusted adult. If you can work on that strategy with them, then they feel supported through the transition process. And ensuring that families have the details they need. That sounds really, really simple, but if they have the correct contact details and they feel like they've got all the information that they need to hand when they have questions, perhaps later on, they know who they can contact and they've got that name in their head already. That can actually make a really big difference. Just knowing that there is somebody there that you can ask those questions to. It's difficult on a transition evening, or if you've just got an hour or so, it's quite easy to forget the information that you wanted to know. So being able to just contact at a later date is really helpful. And we do often have teachers and Senkos who accompany students or their families on school visits, not usually on transition evenings, but often on the visits. And that can be really helpful as well. So you, as we said earlier on, you are their key person currently, and you are their current really supportive relationship in school. So it's really helpful if you are able to do that, if it's maybe somebody who's particularly nervous, or a parent or carer who might perhaps need the support themselves. Okay, so I'm hoping that has shed some light on what certainly I consider to be the key factors in transition, and has hopefully provided some food for thought and some strategies that could be applied in various different settings. So thank you very much for watching, and if you do have any questions, feel free to email me. My email address is on the screen at the minute. Thank you very much.